come back to me the next Sunday and say, Mark, I didn't miss church. And I don't think she had missed church in 75 years. That's got to be worth something. The other things, she had whenever I went to visit, the Presbyterian record fanned out on her coffee table. And I think at St. Andrew's, you could get points for the A spire. And think, if you've kept all those A spires and lined them all up, you could have all kinds of heaven points for that. The picture of the praying hands, the picture of the Last Supper, the Bon Tempe organ. Pearl loved to play the organ. Stacked up in the back, George Beverly Shea music from all the Billy Graham crusades. Next thing, and I don't know if Doug would appreciate this all that much, she could sing just a little bit higher, and a little bit louder, and a little bit longer than everyone else in the church. So at the end of every verse of every hymn, you heard Pearl's voice just extending a little bit further. It was just wonderful. Old Country Roses. How many of you have some Old Country Roses plates or dishware? Oh, come on. Okay, yeah, all right. Pearl had that. I'm not sure how that relates to your faith, but I know it's in there somewhere. And then the stuff with the squares and the sandwiches and the tuna casserole. And you can grade yourself. Now, Pearl was the absolute perfect Presbyterian. Or at least I thought she was. Until one day at about 7 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang and it was Pearl. And Pearl said, Mark, I want you to come and visit me. And I said, of course, Pearl. And I've been to visit her many times. I said, how about Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, I'll come over and have a nice cup of tea and some of those scones that you can make. And she said, no, Mark. I want you to come and visit me now. Holy smokes. But if you score 100 points on this list, you can tell the minister what to do. We got into my car and I drove outside of the city over to Pearl's house. She lived on a very plain little short street. And when I turned the corner to go down the street to Pearl's house, I slammed the brakes on and I gaped in absolute terror and wonder. Pearl's house was completely surrounded by OPP cruisers. And I thought to myself, Pearl, what have you done? You had us all fooled, Pearl. We thought you were perfect, but what have you done? And I thought, has she been like dealing in illegal diamonds, or smuggling arms into the Middle East, or making illegal photocopies? What has she done? And as I was stopped there in stunned terror, this big white van pulled up behind me, blasted its horn, pulled around me on the road, drove into the middle of Pearl's yard. A police officer got out, opened up the back doors, and brought out this great big black and brown German Shepherd police dog and ran out into Pearl's backyard. And as I stared in wonder, thinking this is the strangest thing I've ever seen, I felt the thumping of the OPP helicopter, and it was circling around Pearl's house. And I thought, holy smokes, has she ever done it? And I parked as close as I could get to her house, and I walked up to her front door that was guarded by a police officer, and I said, can I go in and see Pearl? And he said, are you a friend of hers? And I said, well, I'm her minister. But I've got nothing to do with whatever it is she's up to. And he said, well, you better go in. So I went into Pearl's little living room. You know, it was the living room and the dining room joined together. It's a tiny little room like this with the Bon Tempe organ and the praying hands and the Last Supper and the stack of Presbyterian records and glad tidings from WMS. It was a beautiful, holy, sanctified place. And there was Pearl down at the dining room end, and standing up, filling up the whole room were 6 OPP officers, and over at the other end, curled up in a chair, was a young woman who was terribly emaciated and sick-looking. And I looked at the scene, and I went over to Pearl and said, "Pearl, what has happened here?" And Pearl said, "Well, Mark, do you remember my granddaughter, Tracy?" And of course I remember Tracy, because she was Pearl's pride and joy. For years, she was the only thing that Pearl had talked about over and over again. And over on the mantelpiece, there were 3 pictures of Tracy, one at about the age of 3, sitting at Pearl's dining room table, blowing out the candles on a chocolate birthday cake with a wonderful smile on her face. And the next, when she was 5 or 6 years old, sitting in a little plastic swimming pool out on Pearl's back porch. And another at the age of 11 or 12, sitting at the keyboard of Pearl's Von Tempe organ, learning to play great George Beverly Shea music. And in all of them, a smiling little child. And Pearl said, as she pointed to the young woman across the room, "Well, this is Tracy." Tracy now maybe 20 years old, and I would not have recognized her. She was that sick and that emaciated. And Pearl said, "Mark, yesterday Tracy called me up and asked if she could come and visit." And I said, "Of course you can." And then she said, "Granny, can I bring my boyfriend with me?" And I said, "Of course you can." And they came to visit, and they had a wonderful evening together, and Pearl made them a great roast beef dinner, and the wonderful young man cleaned up eaves troughs all around Pearl's house. It was a perfect night. Except, very sadly, it turns out that Tracy's boyfriend had recently escaped from a federal penitentiary. And as they were looking for him in the night, they exhausted all the other leads, and they finally connected him to Tracy, and they said to Tracy's family, "Where would Tracy go if she was in trouble?" And the family all said, "Well, she would go right to her granny's house." And so at 6:30 in the morning, the OPP showed up looking for Tracy's boyfriend. And as Pearl was telling me all of this, I was looking out the back window through the lace curtains and watching the most surrealistic thing I had ever seen. 3 police officers running behind the big black and brown German Shepherd, and a young man running just as fast as he could in front of them, but not quite fast enough. And when the big police dog was about 20 feet away, it flew into the air, hit the young man in the back, clamped onto his arm with its jaws, and held him down to the ground. And I thought to myself, wow, that's the most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like watching 10 episodes of Cops all rolled into one. Bad boy, what you gonna do when they come for you? I know you don't watch that. That's garbage! And they led the young fellow into one of the prisons, and they brought the big dog to the back door of Pearl's house and said, "Ma'am, can we bring the dog into the house?"